Hotep, Hotep. It's really great to see y'all. We're back into our new season. Yeah, new season. Wow, at the MKA Institute. It's so wonderful to see everybody. And we are so happy to have all of those who are joining us on the YouTube live streaming. Please, by all means, continue to tell your friends to join us. We have here incredible conversations, and we're delighted today we will have one of those conversations. However, I want to just share with you some news I got about 2 hours ago. The wife of Brother David Imhotep, whose book, The First Americans Were Africans, called me to say that Brother David Imhotep has suddenly passed away. And it's a great tragedy for the work that we have been doing. And Brother David Imhotep is a remarkable personality who came up. Actually, he was a football star. Most people don't realize that he played professional football, and then he was injured, and then he went into business, and then he decided that he wanted to study the origin of the African people. That's what he wanted to do. And he found a PhD program that would allow him to study the African origin of people in America. And he studied lost cities of America. He was engaged in showing the relationship between the native peoples and the African people, and expressing this in a very plain and powerful way. I was fortunate to meet him while working on his PhD, he asked his university if I could serve on his PhD committee, so I could read his dissertation, and I read his dissertation with his committee, and we passed him for the doctorate. So it's a great personal loss to me to lose Brother David Imhotep and his wife, Sister Teresa. They have been in the struggle. They are in the struggle, and it is our understanding that she will try to keep his name and his work alive. So I just wanted to say that today, which is our first day back for our new season, that we dedicate actually this program to Dr. David Imhotep. Okay, so now we are also going to announce a couple of things. Our next meeting here is October the 1st. On October the 1st, I will be speaking alongside Dr. Nadav about our new book, Being Human Being. And as we talk about this book, Being Human Being, we will also not just talk about the book, but we will also explain the concepts in the book. Being Human Being is making its way throughout the world, and it is already in South Africa and Brazil and other places as people are beginning to try to understand what we have laid down regarding the whole question of race and the whole question of culture. So this is remarkable, and this is something that we're looking forward to. October the 1st at 4 o'clock, right here, we're going to have a book signing. We're going to be signing our books. We're going to have books for purchase, but we also, the main thing is the information in the book. So we're going to try to go through the book to give you the information that's in the book, October the 1st. I also would like to, first of all, welcome back all of you, and to welcome back those people who have sustained this institution. Certainly, Anna Yaninga, who has been the director here, and the associate director, Dr. Ade. We appreciate the work of our board members, Brother Kareem and Brother Carlton, and other board members who have come through here from time to time to ensure that this organization maintains itself. We are very, very happy to let you know that the symposium that we had last season was absolutely fabulous. People are still talking about it, and I'm just really, really pleased that you have come out today. We're living in tough times, but we always lived in tough times. Black people have not lived in America and not lived in tough times. We always live in tough times in this country. We've been thrust, actually, into an environment not of our own making, and one that is actually anti-African in many respects. It's not only anti-African, just politically, but also in almost every sector of the society. If you're in the corporate world, it is anti-African. You're there if you're black, but you must realize if you're smart that it's anti-African. If you're in the educational world, you must know in the educational world that it is anti-African. You're there, but you must understand that. Whatever you are, whatever your profession, if it's security, it's the same. If you're in the security force, you must understand the anti-Africanness there. Those people who are even fighting for the American government and fighting in the army must understand that from time to time, you will see that there is an anti-Africanness there. The political people like Senator Tuberville, those people who are in the Senate, who are trying to hold up the appointment of officers, and many of those officers are black officers, and hold up the appointment of them for one reason or another. These people are anti-African. So you have to understand that. I mean, Trump himself is an anti-Africanist. In fact, the appeal of Trump for the majority of the people who support him is white nationalism. That's basically why Trump has that 30%. So one of the things we have recognized sociologically and politically for a long time is that there are about 30% of the American population that really harbors hardcore anti-African feelings. And any politician who is a demagogue, and he is a demagogue, any politician who appeals to those people on the basis of white nationalism will get their vote. And that's what the Republican Party is now really having this issue of going back and forth, trying to figure out who is the one who's going to be the strongest for white nationalism. And fortunately, as the Democrats have discovered, the coalition, the plural coalition of multicultural and multi-ethnic people in this country who have always been for the correct position in this society and for progress in the society, for expanding the society, that coalition is stronger and larger and more popular than the hardcore racists. And that's why the Democrats have been able to put together African Americans, those whites who are progressive, Latinos and Asian populations who have been supportive and of the strong sense of progress in the American society. We support that. So this is where we are. That's what we understand. And so we're just very proud that you have come to support us. And we just want you to know that this station, our YouTube station, and our audience here in Philadelphia is a place where you learn the African origin of civilization. This is where you learn the African origin of humanity. And this is where you get the true and the full story of African American history, and where you understand the theoretical and the social and the political value of knowing what is true. Truth matters here, and we believe that. So we just welcome you here today. Now let me introduce a remarkable young man. That is Dr. Latif Davis. Dr. Latif Davis, in fact, I'm so happy his major advisor for his PhD is in the audience, Dr. Nadav. Raise your hand, Dr. Nadav, right? And so she was the one who directed his work. And of course, she is a strong cultural theorist. And so his work, I'm sure, has some cultural factors. Dr. Latif Davis holds the MSW as well as the BA and the PhD. And although he works for a government agency, he is very clear and very direct in terms of his understanding and his appreciation of the power of culture. And that's one of the things that he brings to the work that he does. He's a cultural warrior in that sense. And I am so happy and so pleased. I'm actually honored to be in his presence because the things that he understands and the study that he has given us and the work that he has put into this is extremely valuable. So I'm going to not take much more time, but to just tell you that this topic, which we have discussed on the radio, we have discussed in the barbershops, we have discussed in the beauty salons, we have discussed this topic everywhere. We have had a very strong understanding and appreciation of this topic. We are very, very pleased to have at this time this wonderful, wonderful presentation and person in the form of Dr. Latif Davis, who got his PhD, fortunately, from a good university, Temple University. Dr. Latif.
Yeah, my name's Latif, and I'm an alcoholic. And my throat got a little dry when I got up here. But I just graduated from the Africology department and at Temple University. Got my MSW from Temple as well, and my BA from University of Washington, Tacoma. And that's a long story, give you like a brief, synopsis of where I'm from and where I've been and things like that. So I grew up in North Philadelphia, 22nd and Diamond, 20th and Lehigh, in that area. And I grew up there till I was about 20, and then I joined the Air Force to get out of Philadelphia because I didn't really like being here, So, I left and went into the service and did that for 7 years. I was stationed at Washington State for 5 years and went overseas for a few years and got out in 2004. And I stayed in Washington State because I liked the area, and I decided to go back to school at the suggestion of a friend. And, so that started my school journey, and I always wanted to go to school, but I never really got the motivation, the self-motivation to do it till somebody else believed in me to do it. So that's the reason why I'm here. And I want to talk about gun violence because I moved back to Philadelphia in 2013. And when I moved back, I wanted to be close to the family. I had parents passed on, father left the home and everything that I had to tend to, and I wanted to be close to the family just in case something happened to me or them. But when I came back, I seen a lot of news about the violence in Philadelphia, the gun violence in particular, and a lot of, women and children were being killed. They was talking about that in the news, and I thought that was kind of disturbing, So I enrolled in the when I returned back to work. I was on disability for a number of years, but I rolled back into school and started the PhD program in 2019, and I wanted to look into gun violence and see how I can, approach the situation. And through the process, I started learning about culture, African culture versus European culture, things like that. So I wanted to do a cultural analysis of gun violence in Philadelphia, which is, putting it in the context as far as, like Dr. Sante was talking about, the anti-African mentality, is kind of like a factor, that plays into that for Africans in America. So I'm going to get into it and start the discussion. So just follow along with me. The terminology that I want to use is some of the terminology we use in the Africology department. First of all, Africology is the Afrocentric study of phenomena related to African people. And Afrocentricity is the analysis of African history, culture, and world history from an African perspective. Epistemology is the African theory of knowledge to include the nature of knowledge, means to gain it, and criteria to assess the validity of it. Location theory is the ethnic group's historical and cultural biological space that they occupy, meaning, as if I can either be centered in my African culture or I can be centered in another person's culture. And that's a lot of what, I wanted to talk about. Dislocation is being centered in somebody else's culture and not our own, which is often the case in the Western world for Africans who find themselves in the West. Crimogenic society is the European culture is psychopathically criminal, as are vast majorities of individuals it produces. So that's a concept that was introduced to me by Dr. Amos Wilson in his book on black violence. So the introduction, I want to make sure I'm good on time. I forgot to start my timer, but I'm gonna go ahead and try to get through as soon as possible. So Africology, the cultural analysis of Western culture and its fixation on gun violence and the role of the dislocation of African American minds is what I want to talk about, and also the synopsis of the current conditions in Philadelphia, areas of concern in the city, and preventive measures that are in the works is what I talk about in my dissertation. I won't address too much here, but it's something that a lot of issues that people are working to address gun violence in Philadelphia from an Afrocentric perspective. Utilize the Afrocentric theories of cultural reorientation to suggest a restoration of African identity and sanity through African human redevelopment. So I'm utilizing Afrocentric theorists, psychology, history to analyze the conditions of Africans in the West. Okay, so cultural crisis. Dr. Milana Karenga talks about the crisis, the major crisis in the African American community is a cultural crisis, meaning any issue considered a negative in the African world can be traced back to cultural dislocation or lack of cultural grounding. In addition, Karenga concluded that the Western world in the area of human relations, there was a profound lack of ethics that affect Africans psychologically. And also, this is out of the article I got from the International Symposium that we had in July. It talked also about the dislocation of Africans from the center of their own history as a form of intellectual and cultural terrorism that is the constant attack on the African concept of self. And that plays a role in self-hate, anti-self disorder, misorientation, things like that. Thank you. The statement of the problem is the narrative of white supremacy, which normalizes the homicidal and genocidal behavior and pathologizes African response to the inherent trauma, meaning, the way Africans behave, is often portrayed, negatively in the media, movies, TV shows, music, videos, things like that, as aggressive and violent and things like that, but it doesn't give any context of how we got that way. So I wanted to talk about that. And I talk about black males being conditioned mentally to accept anti-black male disorder. And not just black males, but African American women too, because we've been bombarded by a lot of negative images about ourselves to the point we don't want to associate with ourselves as Africans. We want to be anything else but that. So Afrocentricity's perspective on gun violence is that it's a form of mental genocide and the reclaiming of the African identity can be utilized to restore Africans' humanity. So for the statement of purpose, I wanted to propose an alternative to the mental genocide in the African American community, using culture as a tool for analysis in the historical and contemporary process of dislocation and ultimately relocation. To state the historical precedent that for homicidal and genocidal tendencies is not an inherent tradition of the African heritage, that not only outline the problem of gun violence and its causes, but take a look at the Afrocentric perspective on the psychological and socioeconomic issues surrounding the use of gun violence. So well, as I stated, I'm going to use culture as a tool for analysis to determine attitude and behavior, which is derived from Cheikh Anta Diop's two-cradle theory, which states the African climate of abundance versus Europe's climate of scarcity determines culture. In a harsher climate where there's less resources, people tend to be in conflict over those resources, and Africa is plentiful resources, so a lot of people tend to share, which is a part of the culture. It's a cultural thing to share and to look after your neighbor and things like that. Extended family, that type of thing is a part of our culture, Afrocentric, taking into account the Afrocentric psychoanalysis of the causes and state of mental genocide in African people with the Afrocentric epistemologies proposed for recovery. So to kind of show the contrast between African culture and European culture, African culture is considered the Southern cradle according to Diop's theory, which is a peace-loving morality. Worldview is the universe is alive and have inherent order and divine laws. Ideology is the oneness of all things, group maintenance and collectiveness, and sharing is essential. Life is primary, must reflect divinity. The identity, we are, therefore I am. Ethos, all things are in harmony with nature. So we see a lot of this played out in African culture, with African communities, like I said earlier, acting as an extended family. Even if you're not blood related to somebody, we consider them a cousin or something like that. So it's kind of like, it's a part of our heritage, to be communal. And in contrast, European culture, Northern cradle, warlike mentality, worldview orders imposed by the stronger force that gains advantage by ordering the universe as it wishes, survival of the fittest, ideology, drive for mastery and control of nature and the accumulation of possessions, and identity, I think, therefore I am, which is more like a personal, individual type of approach to thinking, and the control and mastery of all life was the ethos. So these principles here of Ma'at and Isfet, these are related to the ancient Egyptian or Kemetic spirituality and religion, which they practice in all walks of their life, from sciences to art to architecture. They practice Ma'at throughout, the different phases of their life as a form of, improving on their human condition. So Ma'at is right relations with divine nature and other human beings, principles, the 7 principles of truth, justice, propriety, harmony, balance, reciprocity, and order. And in the absence of Ma'at is Isfet, which is the abomination of God and that which is defeated in the universal order, which includes wrongdoing, evil, disorder, and chaos, which is, I equate that to the condition we find ourselves in the West, in particular with gun violence and other issues dealing with African Americans under this culture we consider crimogenic, so to speak. The culture of violence, this is talking about the Ma'afa and our experiences here as enslaved people brought to America. The introduction of gun violence in Africa during the enslavement was a source of constant war and violence during the slave trade, provoking capture and enslavement of other Africans, which led to the underdevelopment of Africa and the overdevelopment of Europe. Even during the period before we were brought into captivity, there was a lot of division and selling of guns to other Africans to conquer other Africans to take into the slave trade. So a lot of that was going on, that we were turned against each other, you know, and held in captivity and brought into enslavement by the end of a gun. So it was the regulation of the lesser humanity that allowed the institution of slavery to be intrinsically linked with violence, and it was through violence, aggression, and dehumanization that the institution of slavery was enacted, legislated, and perpetuated by Europeans. Post-enslavement to the present saw the continuation of the Ma'afa in the form of brutally enforced American apartheid, terrorism, including lynching and other terrible mechanisms of torture and death. So this is the legacy I wanted to talk about, that, you know, just to show that, you know, what led up to the mental condition that has never been addressed. Dr. Joy DeGruy talks about that. You know, we've been through a lot of trauma that's multi-generational, and it's never been, you know, given a therapeutic, recovery process. So we just been, you know, recycling these same experiences and been dealing with a lot of the trauma and the results of that. But I wanted to talk about also the African tradition of resistance. As a community, as Africans, we've been resisting since we've been brought over from Africa and from the beginning. And here it talks about that many Africans found misery, suffering, and death in the Middle Passage, but there was also many Africans who showed incalculable strength and resilience, as well as philosophical conviction. Talking about, you know, the Middle Passage, a lot of the Africans would throw themselves overboard or, you know, cause a mutiny to overthrow the ship, you know, as a form of resistance. And even coming into America, you know, and being, you know, in this environment, you know, we had to work, and a lot of times we would sabotage tools, you know, fake sickness and things like that as a form of resistance. And not only that, but, you know, a history of armed resistance. We got a lot of, you know, people who rebelled, taking up arms, meeting violence with violence. And like Malcolm X said, that was a sensible thing to do, you know. But some enslaved Africans, as well as abolitionists, advocate political violence during enslavement. David Walker, for example, urged his brothers in bondage to rise and kill or be killed. Henry Highland Garnet advanced slaves were prisoners of war in an enemy country and urged, by all the rules of war, you have the fullest liberty to plunder, burn, and kill. And these are the conditions they were in, you know, where they had to make these decisions because their life depended on it, and they were, you know, under constant threat, you know. I mean, a lot of us know the history of enslavement and a lot of the, you know, the violence that was met towards us. The theme of nonviolence, talking about the civil rights movement, would be projected across the airways, but in the background, Negroes with guns would be ready. And this was out of the book Negroes with Guns. It talked about the long tradition of Africans using guns to defend themselves, even during the civil rights movement, which we don't always hear about. I read about the Deacons in Defense, Deacons for Defense, you know, who worked as security for a lot of the nonviolent protesters who would go into the South. But the people in the South were always used to having a gun just in case, you know, violence would occur. So they would follow the nonviolent activists around, and they would be armed. And this was part of the culture in the South. History of gun violence. Okay. History of gun violence in Philadelphia, or violence in Philadelphia. W.E.B. Du Bois talked about the submerged 10th in his book, The Philadelphia Negro. And he talked about that as, it's kind of like the opposite of the talented 10th. He talked about the talented 10th being a small group of African Americans who were, you know, professionals that served their community in a professional capacity. To think about the NAACP and lawsuits that they, you know, filed against discrimination and things like that. Well, the submerged 10th was the exclusion of blacks from mainstream America, which led to deep and debilitating social pathologies, getting into crime, underground economy, as we call it, like prostitution, gambling, violence, and things like that. You know, it was like a subculture that he was talking about. And In a book by Elijah Anderson, he talks about the street culture, and I'll talk about that a little later. Black gangs in Philadelphia started as a result of racial anti-black violence by white teenagers. They formed self-protection groups that were involved in the black gangs. And I talked to a lot of elders about, the gang war era and things like that, and they, kind of gave me a lot of information on that. There was, one side of Broad Street was black, and the other side of Broad Street was white, and you wouldn't cross Broad Street at a certain, back in those days. And, they started to form protective gangs to protect against white violence. And then, the gangs started to protect their territory and started to fight amongst each other. And that went on, and then they said at some point, they went from zip guns to real guns and things like that, and the drugs came into the community, and it just kind of changed the dynamics. And, so it went from, protection to, being, violent offender. The original black mafia was engaged in almost exclusively in robbery and extortion with minimal activity in the contract or assault murder for hire business, at least until the summer of 1970 when they first began trafficking narcotics themselves. And, I was looking into black mafia, and a lot of times we associate the mafia with, European organized crime and things like that, and this kind of instance of dislocation where we try to associate black with something that's usually associated with something white and try to emulate that behavior. And, so that was going on with the black mafia and, drug trafficking and things like that, which, disrupted the community. Frank Rizzo was notorious for police violence in the city of Philadelphia. He and his officers made civil liberty violations by using illegal searches, utilizing excessive and unnecessary force, and the apprehension of suspects, forced confessions, and discrimination against blacks. And in May of 1985, events during the MOVE incident involved police bombing in a bunker on the roof of the MOVE members' homes. This started a fire that consumed not only MOVE, but the entire black residential community. And, this just goes to show, white violence can come in the form of police violence. A lot of time, in the incident of MOVE, a lot of careless, violence that included innocent bystanders and things like that. It's just showing the disregard for African life. And this is out of the book, the Police Brutality, the Philadelphia Story by Dr. Ife Williams. So gun violence issues in Philadelphia, street culture, as I was mentioning earlier, is kind of like the submerged 10th that Dr. Du Bois was talking about, which amounts to a set of informal rules governing interpersonal public behavior, particularly violence. And there's a good book on that, Code of the Streets by Dr. Elijah Anderson, which goes into detail. Very comprehensive study into street culture and life, life in Philadelphia. The regularity and density of gun violence in Philadelphia can make it feel like a mass shooting happens daily. And this comes out of an article of the Center for Gun Violence in Philadelphia out of Community College of Philadelphia. And the article is talking about the emergency room at Temple Hospital, get clusters of people as a result of gun violence every day. And they said the volume of people they get in is to the extent that it feels like a mass shooting happening every day. And so media biases privileges gun violence in white neighborhoods over black neighborhoods. And we hear a lot about the mass shootings and things like that. A lot of times that happens outside of our neighborhood. Sometimes it happens within our community, especially lately. But a lot of the day-to-day crime and violence is overlooked in the inner city because it's just assumed that that's just how we are, talking about the pathology and things like that without any context. So, so that's an issue in news reporting. But they have a solution they're trying to work towards as far as news reporting. Credible messengers who are often connected to or from the affected group and can communicate concepts in an accessible way with a greater understanding and sensitivity to the community. Credible messengers are people in the community who are connected with journalists, and they're able to tell their story about gun violence and the way how they put it into context, so it gets to the community's perspective on gun violence, as opposed to having a random story giving an account of the incident and not really giving any background information. So things like that. The pandemic and associated policies have increased issues already present in low income communities. So during the pandemic, a lot of people were panicking and buying guns, lining up for guns, and things were shutting down. People didn't know what their work situation or their income was going to be like, and a lot of uncertainty. So people, became fearful, and a lot of guns got, introduced into the community. So after the pandemic, gun violence started to escalate, and the crime rate went up, steadily over the last few years. So that's, it's another issue, but it just kind of exacerbated a lot of the, underlying issues that were already going on, the food insecurity, the economic insecurity, and things like that, racial unrest. We see a lot of the protests and stuff like that behind George Floyd and things like that. So it became, publicized and on TV, and everybody was at home, so it just kind of caused a lot of chaos. So criminality, symptoms of society, talked about the crimogenic society, a European culture being crimogenic, a society which breeds unusual numbers and types of criminals and relatively high level of crime and violence. And a commission by Lyndon B. Johnson talks about, in response to riots and violence in the 1960s, found three things: that concentrated poverty created the conditions for violence, that poverty in the black community is a result of the racist white power structure that denied access to economic empowerment and basic human services, and that it was violence and illegal behavior of white communities that provoked black communities to defend themselves. So he was given a lot of the elements of the, causes of violence in African American communities after the riots in the 1960s. African American history has been a history of violence in the South for protection, not for the sterile, uninvolved, distant, detached violence of the contemporary era. It has now been insane and random. This is out of Dr. Zasante's book, Erasing Racism. And he's talking about the difference between, our culture of defense in the South to, moving to the North, and then the urban regions are becoming more individualistic and very antagonistic towards each other, and kind of missing, that cultural heritage of community sensibilities. Gun violence is a weapon of male identity and a symbol of power. Like I said earlier, we see a lot of that represented in movies and TV shows and music and things like that. And a lot of teenagers, young men in particular, consume that and act on it. And it's only acted on in the absence of understanding of themselves and where they came from and things like that. I think with an understanding of that, we have a different, attitude and behaviors kind of thing. So it's a cultural thing, a cultural issue. Blacks target other blacks for violence due to the contempt they have for their own people. There's an inheritance by whites to transcend their own victimization in being black. That's from Dr. Amos Wilson out of Black on Black Violence. So epistemic revolution, I talked about that, which is like the revolution in knowledge and in our thinking, the way we think. So I talked about the first direct ancestors of modern man living in East Africa 1.7 million years ago. There's a lot of history that we don't have information about before we became enslaved. And it's a long history, and it's often overlooked, but we have to, rediscover that. As the first people of the earth, Africans had centuries before any other people to develop civilization and culture. So Dr. Karinga was talking about this in his book, Intro to Black Studies, and it's a very, very good book. And he talks about, the expansiveness of our culture and a lot of things that we don't know about, and it makes all the difference in the way we think. None of us, it kind of counteracts the anti-self disorder or anti-self disorder. None of the theories that placed Europe at the center of history is backed by archaeological evidence, and a lot of us are taught to the contrary about that. That European history is usually centralized, and we start from there. We don't really look beyond it. We don't look, anything other than that. But we have to, reorientate ourselves to look towards our history first and their history second, because it's about, transforming ourselves, through that process. The denial of epistemic freedom and humanity of African people is the most pressing issue of the 21st century. True political, cultural, and economic freedom stems from epistemic freedom. So talking about, every aspect of life, in order to be transformed, you have to transform your knowledge base, and that'll, carry over into everyday activities is what he's trying to say. And, like the difference between Ma'at and Isfet, the order and the chaos, it's just a matter of, holding on to, the principles that we were as a part of our heritage versus, something that was given to us that is not serving us well. I want to talk about mothers and fathers in African families because I've seen a lot of articles about single motherhood. A lot of times is kind of scapegoated, and a lot of the social studies and things like that as a cause of social problems. But it's again, it's taken out of context. There's a lot of factors that came into play, political factors, a lot of things about conditions for welfare, things like that, removing the father out of the home, the father not having any means to support himself or his family, and things like that, being excluded out of the mainstream of society and systematically. The evident contrast between northern and southern cradles draws a line of distinction between African and European cultural norms. One is more accommodating to women in society, and the other is in opposition to it. That's what I've seen from a lot of the policy issues is, the opposition towards African American women and family and men and things like that, and the divisiveness of it. Cultural socialization of children involves messages and practices that coincide with a racial identity and starts with the mother and the family. And, I was reading about the mother's central role in the socialization of the child and things like that, the first teacher, and, how important that role is. You think about, we refer to Big Mama and things like that, holding the family together. And, some of the readings that I came across talked about, mothers are they pass on the traditions, they hold the traditions of the family, keep the family together and things like that. And my mother was like that for our family. She kept most of the family together and kept the house full and things like that. When a child is not properly socialized, the behavior of the young will be chaotic and disorganized, and they will have a weak and immature personality structure that calls for parental balance. So again, Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, she talks about that in the ISIS papers, parental balance and having the mother and the father playing a role in the child, especially the father for the young men, having a role model. And, a lot of times, a couple people that I've talked to said because they didn't have a father in their life that, they kind of got involved in a lot of trouble and things like that. Some people got involved in street gangs and things, and so that happens. So it's important, to have a role model. Like for me in particular, I think about my father, and if I didn't have him in my life, I probably wouldn't be here. So he set the example and gave me the model to follow, and groomed me in that, gave me the encouragement. So African humanism, is talking about pleasure and power of control through white supremacy, dictates Europeans deny African humanity and keep them from feeling a positive self-concept. This is out of Marimba Ani's article about spirituality, African spirituality. And she's also said the culture is a systematic way of ordering our experiences. It is ordered behavior to deal with chaos. So, having a cultural reference helps us to deal with the chaos that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. So getting back to that, can make a difference. The African values of human interrelationships and interdependency are primary needs that validate the human experience. African American humanism perceives spiritual realities and necessitated belief in spiritual forces that interrelate all beings and affect our daily lives. So I talk about reclaiming the African spirit and some of the works of a lot of the Afrocentric scholars, social workers, psychologists, and their take on gun violence, anti-Africanness, and that whole process. This is from Jerome Shell, the Afrocentric social worker. From an Afrocentric framework, some forms of youth street violence can be interpreted as a more personalized expression of a larger societal ethic that legitimates violence as a logical way to battle injustice. And Dr. Amos Wilson talks about that as well, a lot of misplaced rebellion, and it's getting channeled in the wrong way. Understanding one's authentic identity resolves the issue of personal self-destruction manifest by anti-self disorder. That's from Wade Noble's Afrocentric psychologist. And we have not regained our freedom because we have not learned to listen to the inner voice of ourselves. If we could have heard the voice of our own history, ancestors, our own religion, our own culture, then we could have remained free. That's from Naeem Akbar. So the 7 principles, this is from Kwanzaa, Dr. Karenga, established these principles for our community as, principles to live by. And I just wanted to bring it up, for anybody who's plan to do community work for the African American community, just principles to keep in mind, to strive and maintain. This is unity, maintain unity in the family, community, nation, and race, self-determination to defend ourselves, divine ourselves, name ourselves, create for ourselves, and speak for ourselves, and a collective work and responsibility to build and maintain our community and make our brothers and sisters' problems our problems and to solve them together. Cooperative economics, supporting black businesses, purpose to make our collective vocation the building and developing of our community to restore the people to their traditional greatness, and creativity is do as much as we can the way we can to leave our communities better than we found it, and the faith to believe in our people and the rightness and victory of our struggle. Solutions to gun violence is some things that came to mind for me. Understanding that no institution in America reaffirms African values. We have to do that. We have to find our own legacy, look at where needs aren't being met and how and where to meet them, while reaffirming our identity. So, a lot of, social services, a lot of times, needs that need to be addressed, like food, clothing, and shelter, a lot of times is something that needs to be addressed before we talk about, anything else as far as the mental state, because people's physical needs aren't being met, then they won't be thinking about anything else. And the Black Panthers, did that with the free breakfast program and, free medical for the community and things like that, not just for protection, but, to serve the community. Teaching African history and culture through institutions where young men and women congregate, school, recreation centers, social media platforms, community organizations, and events. This is for anybody who's working in those areas, having whatever opportunity you can to serve and to offer, anything, even if you're just passing something along informally, you don't have to teach anything, whatever you have to offer, in the way of teaching somebody and trying to elevate their thinking it can be helpful. So to advocate for a government level intervention to protect African lives in America and to improve the life chances for African communities to thrive. There's legislations out there. I know a lot of people with active, some people may be active in politics or, writing their representative and things like that. And, I know myself, I have to look into a lot of these, legislations that's being passed. Some of them aren't being pushed along because they're not really, being taken, having any notice, haven't been noticed or, publicized, things like that. But just getting involved any way that you can to push, agenda forward to help, our community. And I got a few more minutes, so I'm just going to finish up here. So the points for African Americans who deal with gun violence. This is from Dr. Amos Wilson's book on black violence. The African American community has the right to defend itself if the government fails to do so. Reclaim the Afrocentric self to counteract anti-social, anti-self disorder, build, rebuild, recreate African cultural and moral values to regain cultural sanity, take responsibility for the re-education of youth based on psychology and pedagogic techniques to enhance quality of life. That's dealing with education and psychology. Take the initiative and responsibility for the housing and employment of the African American community, and the African American community must be reborn by knowing its true ancient pre-enslavement, enslavement, and contemporary history and psychology of themselves and other people. Now, that's a tall order, I know that, but, for me personally, I'm trying to start where I am, looking into organizations. There's a House of Emoja. They actually had an Afrocentric program in the 70s that stopped gun violence at one point, and they were known for that. Men Who Care is an organization right here in Germantown. They have mentoring programs, and Mothers in Charge is another program that offers social services to families and things like that. So it's just, the information is out there. It's just, wherever you feel like you can, be of service and offer your help. So conclusions, the history of violence among Africans in America and Philadelphia particularly is rooted in white-on-black violence and African cultural fixations on Americans' heritage and violence. Africans in America have a long legacy of using the gun for protection from outside European communities to inside predators, which is among ourselves. Positive racial and gender-specific socialization of protective factors against negative self-images and violence, and socialization meaning, teaching someone about, racial issues or grooming them into a certain type of character. And Afrocentric education holds the key to reforming Africans who are prone to violence and allow them to have a more humane outlook towards themselves and humanity. So that's my conclusion, and I know it's a lot of information, but if you got any questions, try to answer as best I can. But thank you very much.
Don't go anywhere. Okay. All right, thank you very much. That's our Dr. Latif Davis, and we want to thank him so much for this wonderful, instructive lecture about violence in the American society, and particularly here in Philadelphia. And I know that there are questions. We have questions perhaps also from YouTube, but right now we're going to see whether or not Dr. Ade will come up, and we have the microphone ready? It's right. Okay, to see whether or not there are questions for Dr. Davis. Okay, there's one question
there. Yeah, ever since, I guess, the gun violence debate and issue has been going on for decades, maybe even a century. But my question is, why are we just still focusing on gun violence? Jordan Neely was not shot, and Tyree Nichols was not shot. If you look at the pandemics, not just recently, but in the past, more people have died from epidemics and pandemics than all the gun violence, all the wars in history. So I guess my approach is, should we not expand our conversation and our healing strategies to all violence? Mm-hmm. Not too long ago, I read a about a man pouring boiling hot water into his mouth and face. About a year ago, I read about a man who dismembered his wife while she was still alive. So I mean, so before guns, before bullets, before gunpowder, violence occurred. So we're hoping to expand the conversation and the healing strategies to all forms of violation and violence.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. You know, I wanted to address gun violence because it was most common thing in the news at the time, and but you know, this particular approach I think can apply to any kind of violence, because we're talking about a psychological state, you know, based on a culture that's based in violence, and that can come in any form. It don't necessarily have to be guns. From anybody that's conditioned under these, you know, in this environment. So I think it applies, you know, to just about any situation dealing with violence, because it's a cultural issue, and not so much the method of it. Yeah.
My question is, since this has been our beginning and our journey here, how can we move from being law residing and just become law abiding? Meaning law abiding is an individual decision. Law residing is that we're living with it constantly. How can we just abide by the law, knowing self-defense when we need to initiate more healing processes? And take back our families in a way that they're going to be touched by, but not rained on. We're being rained on because this gun violence is being more highlighted when it's been here all the time. Mm-hmm. It's just like we want to know our history, and it's like they buried it. So they get archaeological myth to dig us up, to tell us who we are, when we're still the same people. All they did was change our name. Mm. So we have to become smarter and strategic and just live a normal life. Because I think long as we keep living theirs, they're going to social engineer everything we do, and we're going to fall prey to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. You know, that's what I'm, you know, trying to address is the cultural factor, you know, because that's part of the social engineering, you know, falling into the, you know, the ways of the West, as opposed to knowing what our own ways were, you know, and you know, becoming a part of that, you know, as an alternative to try to live, like you said, you know, law-abiding citizens and things like that. Because, you know, a lot of people, I mean, everybody's, you know, in a different situation. You know, some people grew up with violence and things like that, so that's maybe all they know, or that may be the culture they came from and things, you know. But, I don't know what to do with those people. They say sometimes you can't help everybody, you know. But as for ourselves, you you can educate yourself and develop in your own, and share that with people in your community, or people you're in proximity with, or community organizations that may need that knowledge base. But it starts, I think, with developing ourselves and just trying to do the best that we can with what we know how.
My name is Duke. It's very good you come up with the you still promote the plans that might help as far as gun violence is concerned. The community events that come about that bring people together to educate them and let them know that something needs to be done about it. A simple thing like if you possess a firearm, what they said to get a lock for it, so it can stay out of the hands of youth. Youth programs, it's always a good thing to. It's always such a thing when you can educate a youngster and bring them about to African studies. and and it's just such a good thing to keep emphasizing, to keep trying to educate, to not forget, to not let them forget that we are behind them as far because they people that do not have a source of income. It's a big problem. They don't have a source of income or anything constructive to do. So these programs that are issued to give youngsters something constructive to do will help than will hinder. So it's a good thing to keep on these programs going for the adults to take to pay attention to their children, and for the children to have something of substance that they like, so they can stay out of trouble.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
My comment is, I appreciate your presentation, and it was so well put together and thought through. Yes.
Thank you.
I had the opportunity of seeing an interview of Malcolm X, wherein he said, until we as African people in this country learn to love ourselves the way white people love themselves, even going back to our ancient history of self-love and self-care on a collective nature, there's nothing that the government or any other group can do to end that racism, which includes that gun violence, and as Dr. Farouk was talking about, the other forms of violence that occur. Until we put a real concerted effort on building that self-love, that collective love, because we're at every level, every sphere of our interaction or culture. Oh, excuse me. We still have a tendency to tear each other down. It's like it's in our DNA, and we have to consciously fight against that.
Right,
so
right.
I don't know if you can respond to some of that.
Yeah, I agree. That's kind of what I'm getting at. I know some people may say that education of yourself, how does that make a difference? We see what not having it does, you know what I mean? And, in the absence of that, you're going to gravitate to whatever's, in your environment. We kind of like products of that, and whatever that environment says we are or what we should do, we're going to do it because we don't have any other frame of reference. So I think, like you said, it's very important, and Malcolm X was talking about, we have to migrate, not physically necessarily, but culturally, and mentally, back to our former selves, in order to, to protect ourselves from, from this hostile environment. We living in it, but, we subjects of it as well, as long as we stay in that position, but if we center in our own culture, we don't know what kind of difference it's going to make, but we know that, others who, in some cases, grounded in their own culture, don't act in the same type of way, so I think it's important, that we kind of gravitate for any kind of information, that's as far as following the scholars that we know, who have documented evidence and things like that, and follow them on, YouTube, social media platforms like this, and just getting as much information as we can, yeah.
Hi, Dr. Latif. That was
Hi.
a wonderful lecture.
Thank
I
you.
just wanted to ask you a question. I know you mentioned there's different organizations and programs to address gun violence. Do you think there's anything additional that can be done to address it besides the programs that we currently have in Philadelphia?
Yeah. I don't know what else can be done as far as gun violence. I know there's a lot of talk of legislation and things being done, but a lot of times it's stalemated, and but it's a complicated issue, and I don't want to profess that I have all the answers to it. I'm just kind of looking at it from a cultural standpoint. But it's just a matter of looking for something in our own research, looking up things that might be related to it, and figuring out what's available, and just kind of getting involved, wherever you can, and participating as much as you can. There may be organizations, there may be community classes, things like that. Maybe inviting somebody along. Just passing on what you can, where you can. And I think that's probably the best that we can do right now. And I can't, speak anything other than, having an answer for, gun violence as a whole, because it's part of the culture, and it's here for the time being, but we can do things to protect ourselves individually and, as a community, working towards a, different way of life together. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. All right, thank you very much, Dr. Latif Davis, and thank you very much for the questions and the discussion. We are very, very delighted and very happy and very pleased for this presentation. One of the things that I gathered from this powerful lecture in terms of the information was that the cultural issue is fundamental. And Malcolm also said a lot of things, and he, of course, was one of our greatest philosophers. But one of the things that Malcolm also said that if you don't know your history, you may very well think your enemy is your friend, and your friend is your enemy. So the issue that I like that he presented today was this whole issue of knowing your culture. It seems to me that institutes like the Malefiketi Asante Institute for Afrocentric Studies and other institutes around the country and around the world that concentrate on teaching African history and culture will go a long way toward educating those people within the society who are in some way engaged in violence against themselves, you see? And you engage in violence against yourself is a sort of a form of not only cultural genocide, but it is physical genocide. So let me just say that we expect and we look forward to seeing you on October the 1st when we have the lecture, October the 1st at 4 o'clock with our discussion between Dr. Nadav and myself about the new book, Being Human Being, Transforming the Race Discourse. And that we will have it would be a wonderful occasion, and we look forward to seeing you here, and we will have some of those books will be for sale on that day. Are there any, did I miss anything, Doc? Okay, so we thank you very much, and we will say, as we always do, we call upon our ancestors, far and near, the mother of our mothers, the father of our fathers, to always render mercy and to bear witness for the liberation and the victory of all oppressed people forever. It is done. Ashe.